The new reality of a Donald Trump presidency 2.0 is not just something for all of us here in the United States to contend with, to adjust to. The entire world is preparing for Donald Trump's second presidency as well. What global leaders will soon have to face is America's leader, a man who has made very clear his affection, his affinity, his agreement on policy and style and tone and tenor and tactic with the world's autocrats. He has displayed publicly that he can be easily and completely swayed by their flattery. He has dug deeper into his isolationist policies, and he has signaled he may not honor America's alliances, and he's done it all out in the open. Let's not forget the warnings from those who already served with him. Here's Trump's former national security advisor, John Bolton, talking about Trump's view of NATO.
He doesn't understand the alliance. He sees it in terms of America providing defense contracting services to a bunch of ungrateful Europeans who don't pay for it. And if he had his druthers, I do think he would withdraw from the alliance. I think it's a very serious risk.
And it's not just NATO that is at risk today. The future of an entire nation, one of our closest democratic allies, Ukraine, now depends on a man who has criticized Ukraine, has attacked the support we have given Ukraine, and has said that he would, quote, end its war with Russia in 24 hours. Of course, there are no details as to how he would do such a thing. Among our allies across the globe, especially in Europe, an unease, deep unease and anxiety about the future of America's commitment to democracy. New York Times reports this, quote, in nations that leaned on the U.S. to defeat fascism during World War II, there is still a sense of shock that American voters have elected a felon who has promoted threats of violence against journalists and said he would use the courts and the military against domestic enemies. Quote, I don't see a great future for European democracies if there is not a strong democratic America as a rock to lean on. That was Nicole Bachran, a political scientist in Paris. More from that Times reporting, quote, but now, after witnessing his first term, the world already knows that the only certainty with Mr. Trump is uncertainty. He has often said that keeping the world guessing is his ideal foreign policy. That's where we start the hour. Some of our favorite experts and friends. Former Prime Minister of Australia, Malcolm Turnbull, is back with me at the table. Ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, Congressman Jim Himes, is back. Malcolm, I start with you. Your reaction.
Well, look, Donald Trump is very different. You know, he's different to any other U.S. president we've had to deal with. And his disruption and uncertainty and his erratic approach is all part of his modus operandi. It's a feature, not a bug, of Donald Trump's approach to international affairs. So, yes, we are going to have to live through 4 years of greater uncertainty. And look, I suppose I'm trying to, be as balanced as I can here. Not everything Trump says, just because Trump says something doesn't mean it's wrong. And, he has been right to say that allies should lift their game and invest more in their defence. But on the other hand, if he creates the impression that America cannot be relied on or can't be counted on, all that does is encourage and empower our adversaries like Vladimir Putin, like Xi Jinping. And it also, if America is seen as being uncertain or unreliable, it will also encourage countries that are in the middle, if you like, that are not totally rusted on allies like the UK or Australia or most of the NATO members. It'll encourage other countries to hedge and perhaps move closer to our adversaries. So, there's no question from the international community's point of view, stability, certainty, predictability is a plus, but that is not part of Donald Trump's brand or his MO.
Mr. Prime Minister, do you believe Donald Trump views Vladimir Putin as an adversary?
Well, he's certainly fascinated by Putin. There's no, everyone, I've observed that. Everybody has observed that. So many people have commented on it. I don't think he views Putin as an adversary in the same way that most of the intelligence community and security establishment the United States does, to be honest. But he has a fascination with Putin. He has a fascination with other strongmen. I mean, the New York Times is right in their headline when they said America has chosen a strongman. And so Trump relates to, admires in many respects, is attracted to Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin above all, even Kim Jong-un, for heaven's sake. You know, what an unlikely pen pal. But Trump would talk about exchanging love letters with this guy. So he's very different. That's what I'm saying. He's a very different president. And other leaders have got to be prepared to stand their ground. I mean, look, my point in essence, my advice to other leaders, I'm a former leader, obviously, is that the best service they can give America as a friend of America is their candor and courage and conviction in dealing with Trump. If all you do is tell Trump what he wants to hear and suck up to him, which is what a lot of people are inclined to do, you're not going to be doing your own country a service, let alone the United States, because Trump will be surrounded by yes men and sycophants inevitably. I mean, that's always a risk for any president, but especially so with Trump, and especially, I think, in his second coming.
Mr. Prime Minister, we previously spoke about intelligence sharing and the extraordinary sort of sum of the total of Five Eyes intelligence that benefits all of its participants, but America sees the best intelligence gathered by our closest allies. Do you believe, you said you're a former, would you advise the current leaders of your country to share intelligence with Donald Trump, particularly as it pertains to Russia and the war in Ukraine?
Look, we don't share intelligence. Well, for a start, Australia doesn't, that's not an area where we would have a great deal of activity. You can imagine we're more focused on our part of the world. But as a general rule, the sharing between the Five Eyes intelligence agencies, particularly in signals intelligence, is about as intimate as it can be. And I don't think that will change unless circumstances give people cause to change. So, there have been times when famously in the Cold War, when the Americans were very concerned about Russian penetration in the British intelligence agencies, and there was a reluctance to continue sharing there for a period. But I think as long as you're confident the other agencies are going secure, that sharing will continue. And you've got to remember, the United States is the biggest gatherer of intelligence. So while the US benefits, say, from our intelligence, and Britain's and Canada's and even New Zealand's, the net balance of benefit is much greater for us because the US is so much bigger.
Congressman Hyams, you sit on the House committee. You're the ranking member. Well, I guess we don't know who will control. A little uncertain who will control, which party will control the committee. Historically, it wasn't a particularly political body of work. In the time of Trump, it became extremely political. Devin Nunes was racing over to the White House. There was unmasking. I mean, it became a hotbed of extremely partisan activity. What are your concerns as Trump is reelected?
Well, I have multiple concerns. I did live through that Devin Nunes era where he became, as chairman or ranking member and chair, sort of a tool of the Trump administration. I have a lot more confidence, I will tell you this, in Mike Turner. He's no Devin Nunes, but Mike Turner is also subject to pressure. And what we saw yesterday was that Donald Trump owns the Republican Party, lock, stock, and barrel. This is not, no incumbent is going to pull a Kinzinger again, right? You step out of line, boom, you're gone. This is why, by the way, I have concerns about the filibuster in the Senate, because I think when Donald Trump decides he doesn't want the filibuster, it's gone. But with respect to intelligence, look, I think, Mike Turner and I have worked very hard together. I think he's going to be under an immense amount of pressure because at his heart, you can say a lot of things about Donald Trump. At his heart, he does not want to hear what is inconvenient or unpleasant to him. And that is precisely the intelligence community's job, to speak truth to power. So, again, we don't know which one of us will be chairman or ranking member, but that's going to be a very difficult moment if Mike continues in the chairmanship. I
mean, and just to deal with the elephant in the room, Donald Trump is currently today charged with the mishandling of national defense information and becomes the country's commander-in-chief. What are your broader concerns about the nation's most prized secrets?
Well, it's a subset of a lot of concerns that I have, right? I mean, it's not just storing boxes of documents, of classified documents in Mar-a-Lago, and we had this long conversation about how precisely bad a crime that was. It's a bad idea to have classified documents in someone's garage, whether you're Donald Trump or Joe Biden. But by the way, he also famously tweeted classified information. So I'm not quite as sanguine as the prime minister is. The UK, Australia, allies that aren't in the Five Eyes that share information, Israel, they're going to think twice, I think, about sharing information if they fear it may be exposed by an erratic president. But compared to my worries about Ukraine or other trouble spots in the world, again, that's a
well, let's talk about Ukraine. I heard from Igor Novikov, who's a regular on my program, who I think it's become sort of known about the Ukrainian spirit, called to check on us here in America, as he's literally on the battlefield or in and out of the front line there. Tell me your thoughts about what the Ukrainians are girding for.
Well, and let me start by saying that I have always felt that the current administration could have done more with respect to the granting of authorities to use our weapons. The Republican Congress held up the $60 billion for Ukraine for a long time. So there's a whole bunch of blame to go around here. But we don't know everything about Donald Trump. We know that he has a deep, deep antipathy for Ukraine. It was the subject of his first impeachment. We know that, as the prime minister said, he has a bizarre love for Vladimir Putin, so much so that he stood in Scandinavia, you remember this, and said, I trust Vladimir Putin on messing with our elections more than I trust our own intelligence community. So, the good news is NATO is in a very different place. Europe is in a very different place. So they're going to be prepared, not entirely, but to some extent, to step in for what is inevitably going to be a decrease in the administration's support for Ukraine.
We had a lot of very frank conversations after January 6th, and I think it was an open question whether that would be a break glass moment for the Republicans. One by one, with the exceptions of Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, they fell back in line. What were your feelings as you watched this resounding victory for Donald Trump last night?
Yeah, I understand my Republican colleagues better. There's 1,000 rationalizations you can use to make yourself feel better about supporting an obviously broken person. The Democrats are just as bad, which of course is whataboutism, insane. I'll be very candid with you and say what's hardest about this, and we took a shellacking across the board. We did just fine in Connecticut. We did a lot less well than we did in 2020. We took a shellacking across the board. What's hard for me, I used to believe...
Why do you think that is?
Well, look at the charts. There's not a state in the union where there wasn't a right shift. And, I'm not a political pundit, but inflation is very hard. I think that in 2020, people were looking at what Donald Trump said and did around COVID, which was killing lots of Americans. That went away. People don't remember COVID all that well, but they do remember that chicken costs a lot more than it did 4 years ago. So anyway, this will be unpacked for weeks and months. But it is, for me, I'm sort of a West Wing Democrat. That's kind of how I grew up in politics. And I just, to my core, believed that there's no way that tens of millions of Americans are going to sign up and say, yes, let me have a guy who lies 50 times a day, who, whether, he should have been tried in New York or convicted here or indicted there, is constantly in trouble with the law, who cheats and lies. The idea that the American public, a significant chunk of the American public says, yeah, that's my guy, it fundamentally alters, at least for me, this, optimism and sense of the American public is fundamentally decent. That's for me to work out because, of course, we took the shellacking and now we need to go to work to make sure that we're doing exactly what the Constitution demands that we do, which is to be a loyal and aggressive opposition.
Mr. Prime Minister, how does the result